I thought the Peoples was going to be here because Brian said someone pulled up in a white van. They were here a couple of weeks ago. It was on Day of Atonement, in fact. And we need more Peoples. Oh, was it? But thank you for that. And you know, Abraham, you know, it says that Abraham's faith was accounted to him for righteousness, and that also Abraham was called a friend of God, and I think a lot of that plays into that. And I heard somebody give a message one time that one of the reasons, of course, it was a test for Abraham, but it was also God wanted someone else to know what it felt like to, and to know, I can't imagine what God must have thought of Abraham after that he was actually willing to go through with that, or the agony that Abraham had leading up to that is just, it's always an intense story. Good afternoon, brethren. It's good to be here. Good to see all of you again, what of you are here. I don't have so much, and it's always good when I have one or more of you to share something, because today I don't have necessarily a sermon. It seems to me more like a thought for the day. Just some things I tried to put down that I've been thinking about for a few days. You know, somewhere at the Broadway, on the beach where some of us gathered the other night for a meal, and probably many of us went there several times during the time we were at Myrtle Beach. Somewhere, and I don't know exactly where, because I never know which way to go into Broadway at the beach to get where I'm going. If I'm going to the Japanese steakhouse like we did with Mike and Janie, I go in on one way and then I have to drive all the way around Broadway at the beach before I get to. And then another night we went to Liberty, and I thought I would go in a different way, and I still ended up doing the same thing, coming in on the opposite side and having to drive all the way around. But somewhere in all that melee, there is an upturned building. Now, I didn't get there this year. I have been there before, a time or two. And there are many interesting, entertaining things to see and do. And it's the, you know what I'm talking about. It's the upturned buildings. And the upturned building, and they accomplished at least one goal with that building. They made it memorable. And you can see it. And then just another thing they had out there the other night when we were leaving, one of the nights that we were there was the King Kong. Did anybody see the King Kong in the Empire State Building? I don't know what that was about, if that's permanent or if it was just there. A wax museum. Did you go there?
No, we didn't go there.
But anyway, they made that building memorable. Recognizable, this building is. It's made to look as though it's been uprooted from someplace and just dropped there on its top. And it is called Wonderworks. Again, I didn't get there this year, and if you've ever been there, if Mary was here, she'd probably be giggling right now, because when we went in, and you go through this tunnel, it's not a tunnel, it's a catwalk that goes through this thing, and there's all this spinning, the lights and stuff are spinning around you, and you cannot stand upright and walk. The catwalk's not moving, but it psychologically, you're you know. And her mom was just having a terrible time getting through there, and Mary thought it was just hilarious. And it was tough for me at first, and then I had to stop in the middle of it and say, "This is not real. It's just a catwalk." So I could stand upright and walk across. But I mean, if you get caught up in the visual, you can't stand it. It's like you're in a tornado. But again, I didn't get there this year. There's a kind of a condensed version, but you know, there's always, I think about that, and I think about the marketing. The marketing is behind this building. There's always got to be new ways to attract people. Something different, something new. And it's got to be creative, and it's always got to be changing, because people are harder and harder to impress. It's harder and harder to get things going that people will remember and want to visit. But then there are the old things. They're the old things that work. This is a time of year for carnivals, state fairs, amusement parks. Well, amusement parks are year-round, but a lot of carnivals and state fairs. I saw some of those on the way home and on the way down. I know the Cleveland County Fair was going on last week. I don't know when exactly the state fair is. It might be going on right now. Pardon? Started yesterday. But you know how it is when you go to those things. There's similar things that happen, and it's the smells of the food. It's the blinking lights, it's the music, it's the festivity. It's all there for a purpose, and people yelling at you to come waste your money, like I've done plenty of times before I learned my lesson. But it's fun, it's festive, but it's also fleeting. These kinds of things are temporary enhancements, like going to Wonderworks and being amazed by the things that you see in there and the things that you can get on and ride and experience. They're fun, they're festive, and they're fleeting. They're temporary enhancements to the routines that we have in our daily lives, the things that we do every day that get monotonous, and then we have to be entertained. We have to get outside of that and be enhanced, be entertained. Now, you may think I'm getting ready to say all that stuff is bad, but joy is good. Laughter is good. Time spent with important people enjoying temporary enhancements is not a bad thing. That's good. It builds relationships. It's quality time spent together. You laugh together. You have joy together. That's not bad. It's all a good thing. Because I know, even as long as I've lived, that life in its entirety is short. Life is short in its entirety. The beautiful, the happy, the joyful parts of that are just a portion of that short. Hopefully it's the larger portion. Hopefully those beautiful, happy, and joyful moments are the larger portion of that short existence. But even that is terribly too short. It should be valued and embraced. I believe a healthy understanding of its temporariness, and I'm not even sure that's a word, and its brevity helps with that, helps us to embrace and value those moments, because we know that life is fleeting, that life is short, and those beautiful, happy moments are even shorter. Last week was a good example. You're driving down, even if you go for the entirety of the thing, which many of you did, you're driving down and it's always the same experience. You're going down, you think, 8 days, 9 nights, whatever it is, 10 days, and it's going to be all these things. And I already knew it. I was only going to be there for 5 days. And you get there and you start thinking, I need to do this. I know I'm only going to be here for a shorter amount of time, so I need to get this done, this done, this done, this done, spend time with these people. And as the days click by, you realize it's not going to happen. We did end up having lunch with David and Teresa and them on the last day that I was there. That was our parting gift. But these things going down, that it's a fleeting experience. I'm only going to be around all these people. This is the one time a year that I get to be around most of these people, and I'm going to try to spend as much time as I can with them, make as many joyful memories as I can. But then, before you know it, you're putting the suitcases in the car, and you're coming back up the road. So you know that, and last week was a good experience. Or not a good experience, but it's a good example that everything is fleeting. But what carries those in between blocks of time for us is knowing that there is a permanence somewhere. That life is whatever time we can have between those blocks of life is what joy that we can find in permanence. And there is only one place, brethren, that we deal with permanence. It's not easy to think about. It's not, because it takes some work. It's out there. Like Brian was talking about the universe, some of those things, even as he stands up here and reads that stuff, and we know how large it is, and we try to get our minds around it, we know that it's just so far out there, and it's so huge, and it's so big that we can't really get our minds around it. And when we deal with permanence, that's the way it is too. It's out there, and it's hard to get your mind around, because we don't deal with it here. We know everything here is temporary. Everything here, like the old saying, all good things must end. Thank goodness all bad things must end too, but things just end. We see it, we experience it, and we live with it. So it's hard to get our mind around, not because we don't believe in it, not because we don't believe that there's something permanent, that there's something that's everlasting. We do believe that. We do what we do, and we try what we try because we know that that's out there, but it's still a little bit hard to get our mind around, not because we don't believe it, but because our brains are not equipped to deal with it. They're just not. Our brains are not equipped to deal with never-ending, most especially never-ending joy. How do you deal with that? How do you get your mind around the concept of never-ending joy? And not just never-ending joy, but a setting of never-ending love and never-ending peace. We don't have to deal with that on a daily basis. So it's hard to get our minds around. I remember, and I've probably told you about it before, it was either on History, Discovery, one of those channels. It was a program And it would take a huge city like Detroit. It had almost happened to Detroit for a few years ago, it seemed like. But it didn't matter if it was Chicago. I don't think it might have been Chicago. And they showed what would happen to Chicago if all of a sudden all the people were gone, if it was just abandoned, and how the earth starts reclaiming. The animals building nests inside the buildings, and, just the grass, the vines, and pretty soon everything crumbles and falls, and then in a matter of time, you can't even tell where that place was. But I remember that. The earth reclaiming where it came from. You know what I mean? There's another thought. I had my paternal grandfather. I never met. He died, I think, in 1963. Now, sure, there is evidence that he was here. I see sons and daughters who are my aunts and uncles, and all the family that came from that is evidence of his existence. But when I think about him, having never met him or gotten to know him, in a lot of ways his life seems distant. Now, my point with that and the earth reclaiming is that his world, his work, his family, all those things that he experienced on a daily basis were no less real than mine. His joys, his sorrows, all those things, no less serious to him than mine are to me. If time continues long enough, and the thought of me would pass through the mind of a grandchild or a great-grandchild, my life to them would seem distant. Maybe they never met me. They knew I was out there. They obviously know that they're here because I was here. But my life would seem distant, so that makes me think about why do we sweat the small stuff? Why do we take life so seriously? My grandfather took his life seriously, I'm sure. But now it seems to me, and I'm just a grandson who never met him, his life seems long ago and far away. Someday my life is going to seem that way to a grandkid or a great-grandkid. But if time continues, to have that thought, we think about these things, and it's not so heavy as we make it. Life is just not as heavy as we make it out to be. It's temporary. Our adversary is a great marketer. He's a great marketer. And I say that because he's not what he does for, the marketing he does for dangerous temporaries, let's call them. Now, there are temporary enhancements to life, the things I just mentioned, spending time at a carnival or a fair or being with family, laughing and having joyful moments and doing all those things. Those are temporary enhancements too, but those aren't really dangerous, are they? Those are good things. Those are times that we spend building relationships and making memories. But there's those dangerous temporaries that our adversary makes us think enhance the moments of our lives. And that can be anything. It can be drugs, it can be alcohol, it can be pornography, it can be illicit sex. It can be all these different things that people get into and become addictions that he makes you think. Part of that addiction is having you to think that it's enhancing your existence. It's enhancing your experience, when it really isn't. Those are dangerous temporaries, and he is a great marketer for those kinds of things. But it's not just what he markets for, it's the campaigns against. The campaigns he has against good. Against good. And I can't give you great examples of that, except for there are schools of thought. There are people who think spirituality is for the weak-minded. If you are a spiritual person, if you are a religious person, then you're just weak. Can't stand on your own 2 feet. You need this great God out there to put your trust in because your life is you're just weak-minded. Now, I know there's not a great movement against that, but he's a God of no's. He's a God of no fun, no joy, no entertainment. If you like it, it must be bad. If it's playing cards, if it's dancing, if it's having a drink, or whatever it is, if you like it, it must be bad. He is a God of no's. No fun, no joy, no entertainment. I want you to turn with me to a psalm, Psalm 78. Now I could read this entire psalm, but then that might, and I think even the parts that I read may make some people prove that point. that he is a God of knows. But if you will turn with me to Psalm 78, let's start in verse 1. The 78th Psalm, verse 1 says, "Give ear, O my people. Give ear to my law, incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generations to come the praises of the eternal, the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he has established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments." Now some might read that and say, see, keeping his commandments, that's no fun. What fun is it? If you keep God's commandments, there's no fun, there's no joy, there's no happiness, there's no entertainment. You know what I mean? But that's not the case. Yes, I would have to say having your children or your children's children set their hope in God. That's terrible, isn't it? What kind of fun is that? Having your children set their hope in God, that's just terrible. Let's move down to verse 11. And that's what this is talking about, passing this down from generation to generation, talking about God, sharing the message of God. In verse 11 it says, and forgot his works and his wonders that he had shown them. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zon. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through. And he made the waters to stand as a heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness, and he gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock, and caused waters to run down like rivers. These are works of wonders. Wonderful works. These are things that God does for people. Not because they deserve it, not because they've earned it, but because he's God. He's a God of love. He's a God of compassion. Because if we were to continue to read this Psalm 78, there's more rebellion. Even after verse 16. And they sinned yet more against him. So there's more rebellion, and then there's more compassion on God's part. There's more rebellion, and then there's more compassion. And then there's understanding. God saying, I know that they're just flesh. They're just flesh. So there's that understanding. Then there's more blessings, and then more rebellion. Then they revive a little bit, and they remember who God is and what he is and what he's done for them. But then it says they go back to they honor him with their appearance, and they lie to him with their tongues, and so forth and so on. They revive, and then they forget. Do you remember why there was a need for a new covenant? We've been reading some in the Old Testament, but do you remember why there was a need for a new covenant? It was because the old covenant was no good? No, it was because the people couldn't live up to it. A covenant is an agreement between two parties, and the covenant is only good as long as those two parties adhere to it. If one party breaks the covenant, it's no longer a covenant, is it? So that's why he made a new and better way for us, but that's why there was a need for a new covenant. But even works of wonder, you can think about sometimes, especially if they're man-made. But works of wonder and being temporary. Let's turn to Matthew 24. They're called the Synoptic Gospels, and this part of prophecy is in Matthew 24, it's in Luke 13, it's in Mark 21, and all of them start the same way, but I'm going to read in Matthew just the first two verses. Matthew 24, verse 1 says, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple. And his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple, their outward glory. Look at this beautiful temple. And Jesus said unto them, yeah, look at this temple. Look at all these things. Look at all these things you can behold with your eyes. And these disciples weren't there on a regular basis. They normally dwelt in Galilee. So it's not like this is something they saw every day. So they were amazed at this temple and its furnishings, and it's ornate, and it's beautiful to behold. Look here, Master, look at this temple. And he says, yes, Look at all these things. Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And then it goes into the prophecy. And like I said, Matthew 24, Luke 13, Mark 21. And we do take it for its prophecy. We know when that phrase is stated, that there will not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down, that it goes into this prophetic sense. We take it for its prophecy. This visual spectacle, this ornate, man-made, beautiful building. Just like, this building that's down at, or this piece of architecture down at Broadway at the beach that is called Wonderworks, and it's this upturned building. It looks like something from Washington, D.C., or it's Roman, Greek, with the columns and the, But it's a man-made spectacle. Even this place at Broadway at the beach, it's interesting to stand there and look at it. And it's already upturned. But he's telling them, yeah, look at this. And we do. We look at this and we think about that prophecy. There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. But you know what? That first line, the first line that I read to you, gets overlooked. It says, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple. Do we know how important that is? Do we realize that as he's leaving this temple, this man-made temple, he's not coming back. He's not coming back as a flesh and blood man. What to do with the ruin of this temple? Not that it hadn't already been ruined with all the stuff that had been going on there with the priesthood and all the things that we can read about. We know that the temple was stained. But yet it had its beautiful outward glory. But he's leaving this temple and he's departing. And I think we need to pay more attention to that line sometimes when we read this scripture. He wouldn't be back. The temple would be ruined. It's doomed. Because he is what makes the temple. In his absence, this temple. Does not Scripture say, does it not ask us the question, do you not know that you are the temple, that you're his temple, that you're the temple of Christ, if he dwells in you? Then we know that in his absence this temple is ruined, isn't it? If he were to leave this temple, because this temple is too stained, you've rejected, and that's one of the things that was happening here, the reason he was leaving the temple and not coming back, not just because of the things he had to do, but he had been rejected. He hadn't rejected them, they had rejected him. This temple that we are is also ruined in his absence. He was leaving the temple, but he didn't leave the 12 disciples, did he? His teaching began in force for them. Again, this building has outward glory, but it's temporary. Even this man-made, ornate temple. Again, I said this was just not so much a sermon, but just a thought for today, just reminding ourselves. And we know that. We go through that whole process of the holy days, and we get to what last week represented, and we know that we're temporary. We're there dwelling in a temporary dwelling. Some pretty nice temporary dwellings, but they're temporary. We're just there for a while, and we're gone. Brethren, we're just here for a while, and we're gone. Like last week, life is fleeting. There's joys, there's laughter, and there's beauty, and they should be embraced. Not just last week, but every day. We need to find. It's hard to, in our everyday lives, look and find but he says if you will look for him, he's there. There's reminders of him everywhere. And sometimes we see it. We walk out of our house, it's a beautiful, glorious day, and we see the blue sky and the green grass and the gentle breeze, whatever it is, or we're in a beautiful place, and we're reminded. And Brian's already mentioned that today is a creation memorial. We should be able to find him today, not only in our rest, but in our observances and in our daily lives. But like last week, life is fleeting. We need to embrace those moments. It helps when we feel those other moments that are not entertaining, or not laughter, or not joy, or not time spent with friends, building relationships, and all that stuff. I think those things are enhanced, and those spaces in between are enhanced if we have hope and permanence, and there's only one place we can find that. Everything else is temporary. Be entertained. Enjoy life. Enjoy life's healthy pleasures. And never forget God's works of wonder and you happen to be one of them.